This is Coffee with Kelly, a dynamic podcast that's dedicated to driving positive change in school safety. I'm your host, Ethan Woodman, Product Marketing Specialist for Crisis Go, and I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, Kelly Moore, Senior School Safety Specialist for Crisis Go. Our mission is to empower you with essential knowledge, tools, and inspiration required to foster a safer and more secure school environment. We hope this podcast will be the catalyst for transformation in your schools. Join us as we continue to dive into the world of school safety. A good afternoon, Kelly, officially.
It is an afternoon.
We were talked so long in our pre-production that we went past noon.
Yeah, but I had a
well, that's true. We didn't
meeting.
Actually technically start that.
Yeah.
An hour. We did an hour later, so it's all your fault.
Yeah. It is all my fault. But it was a good meeting. Good meeting. So, yeah.
Good stuff. Moving right along.
So, yes, moving right along at a very slow pace, but we are making progress.
You're getting there. You're getting there.
So, what do we got today?
Well, so it's funny. We were trying to remember something that we wanted to talk about today, and it took me a little bit, but I figured it out. I remembered, thank goodness, because Kelly was about to be angry with me if I didn't remember.
Well, I'm not going to be angry with you, but the idea is I'm an old guy who doesn't remember things. So every once in a while I'll say, hey, remind me of this. So it's Ethan's job to remind me of that.
I was supposed to write it down. And I don't think I ever wrote it down. So, so I think this actually, maybe this happened in September of last year.
Before we get started,
it kind of became more of a thing, I guess, that got more reported on or something recently, I guess.
Yeah. Part of what we don't do enough is recognize when people do good things. There's a lot of successes, but even in the formalized world of documenting acts of violence and so forth, it's only been recently in the last year or so that we started recognizing, and maybe 2 years now, where we started recognizing and trying to learn from those incidences that were averted, where something could have happened had somebody not acted appropriately. And so I think it's important that, especially when we see it in the media and we acknowledge that, wow, that could have been a pretty big tragedy, that we ought to look at it and explore that a little bit so that other people can understand, what success looks like. And how a simple contact averted what very well could have been a tragedy.
Yes.
So we'll set it up that way.
Yeah, so this happened back in September at a school in New Jersey, where basically a guy dressed up as full, and some say FBI agent or this type of police agent or something like that. So posing as a federal agent, and he tried to basically enter the school. I was seeing some other things. I was trying to find the other article that mentioned it, but I believe he actually he got into maybe the vestibule section.
I think that's the recent one where he dressed up as a security officer.
Yeah. And so basically I think either the front office person or, someone there basically kind of went through that decision process in their mind of hey, this isn't normal, and essentially called the police, and they end up finding a knife on him. But, kind of what you're saying is if that could have been a lot worse, let's say they thought this person was a true person of authority and allowed this person into the school. And then, I guess to me, it's different that if you have a grown adult doing something like that, as opposed to a younger kid.
Yeah. So there was a more recent one where there was a security guard. I think he was actually armed and let through the vestibule, and the office staff asked for some sort of identification. Then he turned around and ran out. And he was caught just a short distance from the school. The one that you're bringing up is a similar circumstances. It's similar enough that when and we talk about this fairly often, is that
You're right. I was talking about another different incident, very similar, but you are right.
uh, yeah,
There is a more recent one that's similar in nature, that happened in Texas.
yeah, that's the one that I'm. But
Also an adult that tried to do this.
yes,
Wow.
yes. So the point here is when there's a simple gesture or action that is made, we can prevent a lot of stuff. In both of these cases, somebody just asked, confronted them, and said, "Hey, can I see some ID?" Or, "Hold on a second, let me call somebody. I'm not really sure what you're wanting," or something. And they call the police, or they call their SRO, or they call a principal, or somebody who has more authority or more experience, or whatever. And they get nervous and they turn around and leave, or they get confronted, or what have you. The point being is that they have possibly averted something, and they should be commended for that, right? And we don't do enough about taking those actions, one, and two, we don't take them often enough, and three, when we take them, we don't often celebrate them and or learn from them, from the greater community, the greater school and community safety people, right?
Mm.
We've talked about this many, many times, right? So let's, and I don't know how they were armed, or specifically, firearm versus an edged weapon.
So the one in Texas was a holstered firearm, so I'm assuming a pistol.
Do you know if it was loaded or not?
It doesn't say. I'm assuming.
So we talk about, in that pathway to violence, the probing and breaching, right? I'm going to do something that shouldn't get me in trouble if I get caught, but I want to see how far I can penetrate the perimeter. How far into the school can I get?
Mm.
And so when we look at that, and that's one of the last steps that is taken in that pathway before the attack. And we talk about them as being individual steps. And we talked about this before, right? That being individual, distinct steps. But a probing to see how far you get, with the intent of, if I get caught, I'm going to just say, "Oh, this is why I'm here and this is what I'm doing," and try to downplay things and so forth. But if they don't get stopped, then that could easily turn into a breaching as opposed to a probing. And the distinction to me is, probing is trying to see how far, just test the security measures. Breaching is, you are in attack mode and you are trying to get into the perimeter and conduct your violent act, right? Those are the distinctions for me. And so when they go into probe and they're not confronted, they may have the ability to breach, or they have just transferred from, "Oh, I'm far enough in here. Why would I risk coming back in here? I'm here," right? That's where we have to start saying, we have to start confronting these people. Those that are disguised as law enforcement in uniform, or security uniforms, or guardian uniforms with some sort of identification. If you're not familiar with them, you should challenge them. And you should challenge them until you're satisfied one way or the other. If
Mm.
you need help, call. If they're legit, they will have no issues with you challenging them. In
Yeah.
fact, they probably encourage it.
Yeah.
"Yeah,
They'd probably be
stop
like,
me."
"Hey, that was really good that you did that."
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you for doing this. Here's my credentials.
So I guess that makes me want to ask a question, and I think I already know the answer, but I'm going to ask it anyways. As a law enforcement officer, federal agent, are you required to show identification if a school official asks for it?
Yes. And in most jurisdictions, you're required to have corresponding identification. And what I mean by that is, you have to have a badge that is serialized. So there's a number attached to it, an
Hmm.
identifying number, so that if you saw my badge number, then you could call the agency, "Hey, I've got somebody here, badge number whatever, and they could say, that's so-and-so, or that badge is missing, has been reported stolen.
Ruh-roh. Okay.
So you have a badge with an identifying number, and then you have an actual identification card issued by that agency, and they should match, right? You shouldn't have a police badge and a sheriff's ID, or a police badge and a security guard card.
What if they have the same name?
Doesn't matter. It's having the name is part of it, sure, but there's not a name attached to the badge unless there's an agency name, right? Or a municipality. And you might have a city police with one name that matches the county sheriff's, right? But there is zero circumstance where now that I say that, there probably is, but where you're going to have a police badge and then a sheriff's ID.
Okay.
Right. So there might be some weird contract or something like that where you work for the sheriff's department, but the contract city who pays the sheriff's department we want our sheriff's deputies to be in police uniforms because they serve us, our community. But I haven't seen one of those. I've seen some that were sort of that way, but I haven't seen one that was completely separated like that.
It's really interesting that, like, obviously this person must have gone through that, reactionary gap pretty quickly of like, hey, there's something off. Here's a decision I'm going to make. It seemed like they would have had to go through that pretty quick. So,
right. And those that, we don't give the people at the front desk enough credit, right? But I will guarantee you, if you walk into most schools, like an elementary school or even a larger school, you have a pretty good idea who belongs there and who doesn't.
Yeah.
Right. In an elementary school, you probably know every kid and their teacher or their parent's name and the primary person's contact number. I mean, it's remarkable how they manage all of that stuff, right? It's pretty quick. Even in a fairly large schools, that staff doesn't know who belongs there and they can identify somebody saying, "Do you go to school here?
Yeah.
What are you doing here?" I mean, because it happens all of the time. Sometimes there's kids that are romantically involved, but they're from different schools. One skips school and goes to the other school, that kind of stuff, right? But people know. Now it's operationalizing that and saying, if you see somebody you don't recognize, they may have legitimate business there. But if you don't recognize them, it's your duty to confront them and say, "Hey, can I help you with something? Why are you out here as opposed, did you check into the office?" Right? That type of stuff. Because, I mean, it's been many, many years since schools have required visitors to check into the office first, right? The problem with that is sometimes the way they're configured, the quickest and easiest way to get to the office to check in is to walk through campus to the backside, right? So, like, parking lots are located sometimes not in the most convenient spots. So they have to walk through the play yard or whatever. Or in some smaller communities, you might actually have an access gate to your neighborhood that's behind the school, and you might walk through campus. They are getting much, much better about locking those during school hours, but still. I remember when I was at my school district, we locked the gates, and the parents were so upset because now they had to walk all the way around. And we explained it, and they were still upset, but we kept it locked.
Whatever.
Yep.
Your kid's safety is more important than your convenience, so deal with it.
It's open just before school, but as soon as that last bell, somebody walks out there and locks that gate. So they close it up for school. But yeah.
Yeah, I would say having a vestibule. I can never say that word correctly, I don't think. Vestibule. Foyer. A way to kind of those.
Some people.
A way to essentially trap someone.
Yeah, some of them call them. Some of them call them man traps. They're pretty common.
Man traps. Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like having that is probably definitely helped because it's like you're stopping the movement, which I know we talk about all the time. You know,
Yeah.
you're stopping that movement, and that way you can like kind of like make your
Yeah.
decisions on a little bit less
Yeah. They're
anxiety. It's like if they
they're
didn't have that, then who's to say that the guy wouldn't have been able to just
walk through
continue on, you know?
or just waited until you got distracted and just scooted
Yeah.
by, right? But they're expensive. Many of the schools that were, we're talking 50, 60-year-old schools plus 100-year-old schools in some locations, but they weren't designed for this. Like many of the schools where I came from, Southern California, they were meant to be open. All of the classroom doors didn't open into a closed hallway. They opened up into the world. So you walked out of your classroom and you were outside. You were probably under a little awning or
Okay.
a roof that protected you so you could go from class to class if it was raining, but you were walking in that protected area, essentially outside. So,
Wow.
and many of the schools, the offices, so you went from one room. If you wanted to go to another room, there were a few schools that were designed with connecting rooms. But if you even wanted to go to the room next to you, you walked out the door, down the little pathway, and into the next room. Offices are often in I call it a separate building, but it's connected by the protected roofways so that you could walk from any part of school to the office protected from the weather. But that's what they were concerned about back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. They weren't thinking of locking one entrance.
Mm.
In California, in many cases, you can't have one point of entry. Zero. There's no chance of that. You can walk to the front office, but that's voluntary.
Yeah.
So
Interesting.
yeah. So there's challenges out there. No doubt about that. But having people check in, and if you're walking around campus and you see somebody who doesn't belong, then where are you headed? Have you checked in yet? Let me show you the way, right? Escort them to the office where they can check in and go from there. But it's those types of, just those little acts that can save us a lot of grief and heartache down the road.
And not to say that we don't need technology, but that was all done basically without technology.
With zero cost.
It was just a person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, zero cost.
Yeah. So good stuff. I like it.
Yeah. So let's go to the next. What's our next topic?
Do you want me to talk about the video that we watched? The short little
You
video?
can. Sure. Here's a warning. People aren't going to like it. We're going to talk about it. I'm going to explain some things, and you may or may not like what I say, but the reality is it's part of what we have to deal with.
Kelly didn't want to talk about it, but I'm forcing him to.
I'm a big boy. I could tell you. But it's a sensitive topic, and I think it should be discussed. But
yeah. Well, I mean, I know I'm a big fan of making sure things are said truthfully, and when things are not said truthfully, it irritates me. So
we have to use that truthfully correctly. It's probably truthful. It's the interpretation and the context and things that we need to make sure we're understanding, because it generally, if we can attach politics to something, it's going to be emotional for 50% of our population.
You're gonna make at least one side happy and one not. You know. Yeah. So just going through my little alerts here, you know, a video popped up that seemed pretty interesting. And it was titled something around like the reality of school safety. And so in this video, they talk about that I think it was specifically, was it Minnesota?
I don't
know if the number was specifically Minnesota, but I think where it was might have been Minnesota. But the news anchor person was saying that there was 183 school shootings in the last 15 months. And you think, wow, that's a lot. That's like a lot of school shootings in,
Mm-hmm.
a little over a year. So I think you and I discussed that what's almost kind of being portrayed is that all of those shootings are incidences, targeted incidences inside of a school. In reality, a lot of those incidences are close to a school or after school hours or involving a student that goes to the school that's, the incident is happening in the community, and all the numbers, all those things are all getting tied under one lump school shooting title.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So,
take it from
uh,
there, Kelly. Why do we do that?
yeah. So, well, it's interesting because I was on a call last week where a school safety expert, I will call him that because he's been doing it for 30 plus years. And he's now retired from the schools and is working for a nonprofit, essentially, if I understand his employment correctly. He says we're down 30%, school shootings down 30%. So if we're down 30% and we've had 186, you're like, what?
Yeah, because that
So
statement doesn't coincide with all the other stuff you see on the media of like, oh, the school shootings are rising.
yeah. So it's all in how we define school shootings, active shooters, and other acts of violence. Over the years, we have associated the terms school shooting and active shooter, especially in our industry and the education side of things. If I say active shooter, what are we thinking?
Someone with a gun entering the school or already in the school
For what purpose?
to hurt people.
To shoot or kill as many people as possible, regardless of the motivation. And are they targeting specific people? Sometimes. Sometimes they're not. They're just upset with the entire campus, the school, the world, and this is how they're
Or
going to
like
get
the
their revenge.
ideology that the school has or whatever.
Whatever.
Yep.
Their motive is victim count. That is completely different situation than somebody who has a beef or is upset with one specific person and targets that person who happens to be at or near a school.
Mm.
And I think this is political. I am not 100% why they do this, but they started counting every incident of gun violence that remotely touches the school. And there's many reasons that violence happens in our communities. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't look at them and we shouldn't consider them when we're talking about school safety. But the mere fact that the violence happened near a school doesn't mean the school was a part of the target.
Mm.
Right? It just so happens to be in the community, and the target and the targeter were in the same place at the same time. Happened to be somewhere associated with the school, parking lot across the street, what have you.
Football field.
Football
Something.
field,
Yeah.
playground, whatever, right? But that particular incident or those particular incidences would have occurred somewhere else within that community if those two were in the same vicinity.
Mm-hmm.
The school is a victim of the circumstance that the two came together in that vicinity. There was no really intent to target the school or the occupants of that school.
Yeah.
And I'm talking gang violence, I'm talking domestic disputes, I'm talking, even student and student dating violence issues, just a fight that escalated too quickly and one of them happened to have a weapon or so forth. There's all terrible things and they're tragic, but they don't elicit the same reaction from the community that when I say a school shooting or an active shooter or what have you, because they're not the same. And I know people are going to say, but they are the same. Gun, violence, tragedy, right?
Yeah, in that way they're the same. The
The same.
outcome
That's right. But
is the same.
the emotions and the trauma that are created as a result of a school targeted shooting and a shooting that happened to be in close proximity to a school elicits different things. Once people understand, oh, at least my kid wasn't threatened. Whereas a school shooting, everyone in the building's threatened.
Mm.
And if you have two gangs that are rival gangs and they're having this little turf war, and one gang sees a member of the other gang at walking on the sidewalk next to the school and something happens, that's not the same as a targeted school violence.
So I think where I'm coming from is we want to solve the problem, whether that's happening at the school or outside of the school or in your community. And so
Uh-huh.
obviously we've talked about, some of the new stuff we're doing here with Connect and how it's really a community safety platform. I think the issue that I have with this is like if we're putting all these things under one umbrella of school violence, are when we're trying to come up with solutions, I don't think that's going to help solve the problem. If you're trying to come up with a solution that's like, oh, we need to solve school shootings, is your solution going to be so specific to the school that you're not really going to understand that it's not happening at the school, it's actually happening in your community? If you understood that it was happening in your community, would your solution be different? That's where I think. Like I wanna help solve the problem, but I think we have to like understand where the problem exists in order to come up with the best solution.
Because this is actually the next point I was going to make, and you
All right,
just
good. That's good transition.
beat me to it.
This is what happens, Kelly.
Right.
You've taught your Padawan well.
Right, my wee little Padawan. But the issue is when we solve or we look to solve in a silo. So this is where we get the positioning of our new philosophy, and that is that we can't separate the community safety from the schools and the school safety from the community. They're inseparable. But we are attacking the school safety problem for a lot of reasons because they're so integral into the community and so forth, right? Everybody in the community knows about the school. They're probably at the football game on Friday nights, whatever, right? You just cannot separate those. But we've been for the last almost 30 years doing just that. This is a school problem. This is how we're going to solve this. We're going to mandate all of this stuff to the point where nobody's looking at it from a community perspective. Nobody, with the exception of Crisis Go. And now we're looking at it, expanding it into the community because it's a community problem. The schools are certainly an important part of that, but so are municipal buildings, so are the sports venues, the concert venues, the fair venues, the festival venues, the parade routes. Those are all part of it. So is the culture of that community. When we talk about push and pull of who's responsible for the culture in our communities, oh, it's the school's problem. No, it's the parents' problem. No, it's the community's problem. No, it's everybody's problem. Now we have to figure out how we literally connect all of those dots and try to solve this as a community. And we have to recognize, we have to sit down and I would venture to say this. One of the first things that we recommend in a school, if you don't already have one, is a dedicated, experienced school safety director, right? Somebody who's in charge of all of those aspects of keeping that school safe.
And you should give that title to someone who's already has a main role, right? Like if you have an IT guy, you should just give the safety director role to him, right?
Right. That's why I said dedicated. Somebody who's that's their function, right? Because it's such an important aspect of your school and your community, right? So that person is integral in solving those problems, and they have to have the resources to do such. I would venture to say you should have a community safety director,
Mm,
right? Not
that's
just
not
a
already
law
a thing,
enforcement, no,
man.
some like a safety czar, right?
Safety czar.
Right? I don't care what you call them, but we have departments of Homeland Security because we were in all of these silos. Why
Mm,
not have a director or a department of community safety? So everyone's going to say, we have that. Okay, what is it? If I were to say you already had it, what is it? Who's responsible for the safety of the community?
emergency managers, some type of police
Popos, right?
popos. Okay,
The popos,
that was my yeah.
law enforcement.
That's our police department. Aren't they
That's
responsible for that?
Aren't they responsible for that? Yes. But are we looking at it from a community perspective? Many people would say yes, we are.
Yeah, on the sides
But
of the
are we
police cars it says we protect communities or some
protect and serve, right?
variation of that.
Protecting, like ours was keeping the peace since 1850. But protect and serve, there's 100 different iterations of that. But the idea is they're worried about those things that they have the authority to work on. But again, we don't have anybody who is that person who brings, and this was the problem that created the Department of Homeland Security, is we didn't have FBI was missing deals, our responses to natural disasters, terrorist acts, all of these things. People were off doing their own thing. And then after Katrina and after 9/11 and these other things, people said, wait a second, we knew about this. Who knew about it? Those guys over there. Well, how do you know they know? Because I just found this classified file. And so there has to be some way to wrangle that within a community. If I am recommending that you have a safety director that breaks down all of those silos at the school level, there is zero reason we shouldn't have the capability of doing that at a community level. If I can do it at a community level, there is zero reason why we shouldn't have a county director of community safety and all the way up. When we start breaking down silos and or at least putting windows and doors and access points into the different silos when it's needed, then I think we're going to be in for what we're currently seeing. Violence has increased. There's no doubt about it. But there's reasons behind it, whether you agree with it or not. And if there's reasons behind it, then we need to address those reasons and we need to establish ways to make our community safer. And I will say this at risk. I will say this. I do not believe that our politicians have our best interests in their minds when they're working. Are there some? Yes. Generally speaking, there's probably more than not. But I also think there are many, many politicians that are out there actively trying to disrupt what's going on for their own power's sake. If we have somebody who is responsible for breaking down those and controlling and working through all of these safety issues, then I think that's kind of a thing that we should be doing. I mean, you could say that the Secretary of Homeland Security is that person, but the Deputy of Homeland Security is at a federal level, not a state level, not at a county or a regional level, not at a city level. And we have these emergency managers who are trying to put things together. But generally speaking, when I talk to it and have dealt with, they're trying to figure out how to respond to the next emergency. Part of that is identifying what our threats are. And that's why I'm working towards trying to figure out their role in bringing people together. And because I can suggest it all day long, I could be right. But until somebody with authority, I convince somebody with authority to say, you're right here. Do we have that? Do we have that ability to have it? It might fall at some point as part of the regular duties of the chief of police and them saying, okay, you're responsible for this, but this is the expectation. You're going to be responsible for managing the school safety, the public organizations, the venue sites, permitting for events, municipal buildings, and so forth. So I think there's potentially, just mark this day down as Kelly said it first, but I think we're going to end up that way. I think we have to if we want to make any headway here.
You're creating jobs, Kelly. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, they sound like taxpayer paid jobs, but
yeah, I'm not funding them.
Thanks for that, Kelly. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So, yeah, but I think that's where we got to go. I think that's the whole idea here is we have to force relationships. We have to have people in position and power who can force those relationships. Mandates have to be sensible, right? They have to be in line with what we're actually trying to do. We can't have state mandates that give, and I know I'm going to get some heat on this, but that says that are so specific that nobody can achieve that mandate. And we can't give a mandate that doesn't mandate supports from other entities. I'll give you an example. When I was in California, they had a mandate that you had to have a full-scale exercise, one full-scale exercise a year. But they didn't provide any support for that. There was no supporting mandate that law enforcement participate or the fire department participate. They just said full-scale exercise without any definition of what that is. Right?
Wow. Okay.
And so all of that stuff has to be very thoughtful.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. And if you have any questions about what we discussed, leave a comment on our website at crisisgo.com. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on Coffee with Kelly, a discussion on school safety.